There she said it. So thank you, everyone. Welcome. And I will say, take it away, Ricardo.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, gender non-conforming and trans deities, welcome to the UIC Freshwater Lab's Freshwater Media Festival. Let's give it up on your muted windows, or if you're watching on the Facebook Live, at the comfort of your own home. All right, so we're super excited to be here today for the Freshwater Media Festival. This is a 2-hour event that brings together changemakers from across the Great Lakes to discuss freshwater, and you guessed it because it's in the title, media. I'm your host, Ricardo Gamboa, or Ricardo Gamboa. You can call me by either of my colonizer names. I'm also attractive, as you can see, obviously. So we're really excited to be here today. Courtesy of the Freshwater Lab. The Freshwater Lab was founded by Dr. Rachel Haverlock in 2014, and its initiative focused on the social context of freshwater. The Freshwater Lab offers things like university courses, it makes teaching materials, it sponsors research, and it educates the general public, us everyday mofos, on pressing water issues. And it also holds summits to promote equitable water governance, or in this case, why we're gathered here today, a Freshwater Media Festival. This media festival is an outgrowth of the lab's commitment to making their education and work accessible through digital storytelling. So today you'll see recent media that comes from the lab, including excerpts from the Backward River Project, which is both a website and the title of a digital storytelling project that launches today. It launches today. You can actually type in www.backwardriver.com or org. I mean, just gamble, take a bet, and it will come up and you can see all the exciting work that's been there. And you'll also see media from our Great Lakes neighbors from Detroit and Milwaukee. This event will run 2 hours. It'll contain live media performances, media excerpts, as well as panels and talkbacks with you all. So in an event that is centered around water, it's only fitting that we acknowledge water and its first stewards on these lands. So I want to do a quick water acknowledgement. The Chicago River, which is the subject of which is mostly the subject of today's event, flows through the traditional homelands of the three fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. The Fox, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Miami, and Sac tribes also call this region home. These communities have been targets of erasure by settler colonialism. The Backward River aims to highlight the histories, cultures, and practices of indigenous peoples who have a right to this land. Today, Chicago's American Indian presence constitutes one of the country's largest urban indigenous communities. And we'd like to thank our friends from the American Indian Center and Fawn Puchel for putting together this water acknowledgement and helping educate us on these issues. So I know you are looking at me and being like, just please talk to me forever, look at me with them sultry brown eyes and be a lullaby in human form. But this isn't about me. This is about the river. And so rather than me speak, I'd love for us to start off with our first segment, The River Speaks, which is a digital storytelling project that was put together by the UIC Freshwater Lab with some Chicago artists and activists who are amazing. I won't give too much of an intro. An intro is when you combine the information and the intro together. So I won't give too much of that. I'll just let them take it away. Ladies and gentlemen, a excerpt from Backward River, The River Speaks.
Okay. Are we ready? Cool. Yep. All right. Let me tell you, I have the best freaking job in the world. I wake up every morning to a Lake Michigan sunrise, and trust me, you haven't seen a sunrise until you've seen a sunrise over Lake Michigan at Rolling Grove. How else do you think I've won so much investment? Those sunrises never get old, just like my job. And I want you to brace yourself when I tell you what I do. People from around the world have to see my job performed. Are you braced yet? Okay. I run backwards. Yeah. Tell me, what other river does that? No, tell me. I'll wait. Oh, wait, there isn't another one. Nobody does that. How many people do you know can resist the appeal of that? Not many.
The North Branch is now being forced to conform to a new status quo brought by gentrification. It gets to transform their industrial corridors into corporate playgrounds because a bunch of white, middle-class kids moved in, pushing out all the Black and brown folks living there. Not only are their industrial corridors being transformed, the companies that polluted up north are moving here, down south, to dump their waste.
Look at that. A sweet old couple just closed their corner store down the block. You know, they spent a few decades running the store and raising their kids. It would be sad to see their establishment go, but no one who went to their store lives here anymore. No one left to say they'll miss it. Pushed out by rising property taxes caused by gentrification.
Hey guys, it's me, the North Shore Channel here. You can call me Channel, but it's pronounced like Chanel. I was expensive. All jokes aside, I'm a beautiful addition to the Chicago River and I help manage wastewater from the northern burbs. So I put up with a lot of crap. Honestly, it's their own fault that none of the other branches have any of these lovely river attraction amenities. I've been here since 1910 and I've worked hard to look this good. The North is starting to turn around and lose all those industrial corridors, but sheesh, I assume the South Branch has so many they might even enjoy them. They are constantly protesting against the treatment of the branches and their industrial corridors. They never stop to think if their protesting affects us channelized canals.
The North Shore Channel tells me to be happy with all of this. They said, this is just what I need to turn myself around to be more welcoming and open. But who am I welcoming and open to? All my friends can't afford to live here anymore. And it's just a bunch of white people now. One of the biggest changes that I'm going through is General Iron's relocation. They've been on my branch for a long time. I've been here longer though. Their plant is one of the few industrial corridors I still have left. And I'm happy to see it go. They consistently violated environmental laws as their pollution metastasized in me. But now, I'm finally getting this tumor removed. Well, I wish it was actually getting removed. Instead, it's relocating to my sibling, the South Branch. They have enough industrial corridors already and plants that suffocate and poison the neighborhood around them.
The North Branch and I used to go back to those days when we were good friends with the indigenous people who lived here. We helped them grow their crops and provided for all their water needs. They took care of us. But that's boring. Look at me now, all this progress. But I've begun to wonder if the North Branch was right. Maybe I forgot what it means to be part of the river. Maybe I'm not a river anymore.
We're all part of one system, but we sure don't experience it in the same way. As the South Branch, I am going through it. I thought that a new era was dawning when community groups shut down the coal plants on my banks, but now the city is permitting massive logistic facilities where armies of diesel trucks will haul plastics from Target and Amazon. We didn't ask for them, and we don't want them. I am surrounded by the victims of incremental violence. My people continue to experience this deliberate attack on our humanity through disinvestment, resulting in closed schools, food deserts, and even a lack of parks. Quite frankly, it's not incremental violence at all. From the barrel of a CPD gun to the putrid air that we are forced to breathe. They're all weapons designed to hurt and kill us.
Let's give it up for the Backward River Canal excerpt, this live performance. That backward river right there was just hitting you. At water going through an existential crisis is my new favorite genre of sci-fi and storytelling. I think that it's an amazing project, and I'd love to hand the floor over to one of its creators, Anish Tailor, who's a graduate student of urban planning at UIC and also a member of the Freshwater Lab, who'll be in conversation with Tristen Ortiz, one of the filmmakers and also creators, as well as the cast members that you just saw. Take it away, Anish.
Thanks, Ricardo. Hey, everybody. So this project, what we're doing is we're reimagining our relationship to the river. And to that end, the reason that we came up with these characters is to give people a foundation for reimagining. It was to build an emotional connection with the water. So from there, we can begin to think of it in a different way. So with that in mind, like Tristen, as the writer of the characters, what was it like for you? How did you go about building that emotional connection?
Well, for me, like I'm a big like nerd about pop culture, so I look at things that have previously existed and just like reimagine them for this water system. And it was cool getting inside the heads of villains and people who are being affected by these types of environmental like racism. And I thought approaching it as these people who experience it, it would be easier for other people who are listening to also sympathize and maybe empathize with the people who live in these communities. So I wanted to make people have associations with different parts of the river where you hear, the North Shore channel speaking and you kind of like feel off about it. And then when you hear the South Branch, you sympathize and you understand their problems. So I wanted to create that narrative around each character where you can associate these emotions and these feelings of the river with them.
Yeah, it's all about that empathy to feel something for the water. Turning to the actors now, I wanted to know what is your relationship to the Chicago River, and has this project changed at all? Samer, we'll start with you.
Hey everyone. First and foremost, so humbled to be a part of something like this. Seldom do Palestinians get a chance to discuss our plight, particularly our plight with water rights. And when I think about water, I think of water as an indispensable human right for leading a life in human dignity. Without water, without housing, et cetera, your life as a human being loses its sense of dignity. And for me, like coming as a refugee from one country that is actively being stolen and colonized to a country that has already been stolen and colonized, my relationship with resources has always been rooted in scarcity thinking. But I think like as we discuss reimagine, like a lot of reimagining work in the framework of reimagining, I want to get away from scarcity thinking and really reestablish my relationship with water. And I didn't get to grow up in the city, even though I live in it now, because Arabs were historically gentrified out of 63rd and Kadzee. So I never had a relationship directly with the Chicago River until I moved here. And being able to voice the South Branch, where I've spent most of my adulthood, on those mental health days off of work, it's been truly a pleasure and an honor to think of it as a way to re-engage with water and what it means for a Palestinian who's had water stolen from him in that country and in this one.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that perspective in here. I really appreciate that. I like what you say about getting away from the scarcity mindset, because that is something that we are in with capitalism and with white supremacy. So that's another way to reimagine is, reimagining it as abundance. Turning to Tonika, how about you? Same question. What is your relationship to the water and has it changed?
Well, being a Chicagoan, born and raised and primarily living and growing up in Greater Inglewood, I didn't really have a relationship with the river. And that in and of itself is, a product of all of the systems. And I didn't really establish one until my adult years, until I start, going downtown, to certain events, or, you know, being invited to parties on the boats. And I was like, oh, okay. And just really thinking about waterways. But also at the same time, you know, I was thinking about spatial injustice as it is related to my folded map project. So this particular project and just having those similar questions really enabled me to expand my thinking about like spatial injustice, and not just thinking about land, but also including water in that. Because, you know, up until recent years, I hadn't thought of it. And that's why I think this project is amazing and really important, because it can offer an entry point to making those connections for people at the varying stages of which they're entering this conversation. And, you know, some people might assume that I knew everything. No, I didn't. But through this project, I was really able to understand it in a way that I had not been taught or exposed to.
That's amazing. That's something we learn in urban planning, in the urban planning college, is people can live like 100 meters from the body of water, but never have actually visited it due to particular systemic restrictions that are put upon them. So I totally hear what you're saying. Thanks for doing it.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Turning to Pinqy, how are you doing? You'll hear Pinqy later on. Pinqy plays the Upper North Branch, and she's going to be in conversation with the Sanitary and Ship Canal later in the program. But for now, how about you? What is your relationship to the river, and has it changed from doing this?
Well, first of all, hello everyone. It's so good to put a face to all the beautiful voices. Again, as well as Samir, I'm super humbled to be a part of this project. It's been really interesting. I am good friends with Yuri Basholain, who is a beatbox harmonica player. I'm a hip hop artist, and his better half is Rachel, and I've just been infatuated with her since I met her. And I have always been so in love and intrigued with people who do things that are very different than what I do, right? So I'm a hip hop artist, and a lot of my work is around youth advocacy and sort of sharing our narratives. So it was pretty perfect when this opportunity came up, because I said, well, clearly I have a voice, and it's a real good one too. You know, they pay me money for it sometimes. And so I was like, this is actually really perfect, so that I can use and lend not only my voice, but my platform to really highlight what has been going on historically and what can happen if we don't change things. So I remember one day after a show, I was drinking a bottle of water from a plastic water bottle, and Yuri must have snatched it out of my hand. And I was like, oh, what did I do? Like, did someone roofie me? What's in here? What's going on? And he's like, no, this is terrible. You should not be drinking from these plastic water bottles. And he's like, and if Rachel saw you? And I was like, oh no, I don't want to get in trouble with Rachel at all. And so this was really cool to give it a voice, to give it a perspective. I was able to just be my sassy Puerto Rican self with it, which was really amazing. But as a Caribbean woman, water to me is so important. So I just came back from Puerto Rico for my birthday, had to just get away and be by the water. And so we tend to forget how many beautiful bodies of water we have right here in our homes. Now it's cold, so I don't suggest going there right now. But you know, we have so much beautiful landscape and so many beautiful bodies of water here in Chicago. And I can remember all the ratchet things that me and my friends did by the Chicago River back in the day. So it's cool now to kind of go full circle and now play the voice of one of these bodies of water, but also to become more knowledgeable about, you know, how it got to be and its history. And again, what are the consequences if we don't take care of these bodies of water that we have.
Yes, totally. Thank you. Sarah, finally, how about you? What has your relationship been to the water, and has it changed?
Yeah, so I just want to echo what everyone else has said. I feel so grateful and lucky to be part of this beautiful project, and I'm so excited to spend time on the website, and I hope all of you do as well. I am a Philadelphian. I have only been in Chicago for 5 years, but Philadelphia is sort of sandwiched, hugged by two beautiful rivers. And so I grew up with those rivers in mind and that water, and being an hour and a half from the Atlantic Ocean. So I've lived near water my whole life and never really thought about it. And coming to Chicago, I lived in Evanston for 2 years and I've been in Chicago for 3 years. And you know Lake Michigan, it's right there. It's this huge body of water that for me just sort of draws me to it as often as I can make it out there. But I don't really have much of a relationship to the river itself. I live on the north side. I live in Rogers Park. I live as far north as you can possibly live and still be in Chicago. And my relationship until this project to the river specifically was the annoyance of a bridge going up when I'm on the train trying to get to work. And I think what I loved about being part of this project was to be the voice of the white liberal, to be the voice of the unknowing white lady who can live her life and not think about the world she lives in or the city she lives in. And it was for me a really amazing reminder of how local and important local politics are for me specifically, and how learning about my city and the inner workings of the city that I choose to live in and the politics of that, and how my privilege, my race, my cisgenderedness, my heterosexuality, like how all of that plays into me being able to live on a north side of the city where I can be an 8-minute walk from a gorgeous, beautiful lake that has beautiful beaches. For me, it's been a necessary eye-opening to the inner workings of this city, how politics and money and privilege all weave into each other, and who has access to water and who doesn't. And that for me has been revelatory. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with everything everybody has said so far. For me personally, my own relationship to the water, I grew up in Dallas, which is landlocked, so I didn't have any notion of what it's like to live by water until I came to Chicago, and this project taught me a lot, basically, and it gave me a new appreciation for water and a new imagining of relating to the beach and to the river. So I have enjoyed it also. I echo everything everybody has said, and it's been fun, and I really appreciate everyone being here. So I'm going to turn it back to Ricardo now. Thanks.
Hey, let's give it up for Sarah, Pinqy, Tristen, Derek, Samer, Anish, and Tonika. That is so exciting. And again, I encourage everyone to go check out backwardriver.org. You can go ahead and hear the branches and hear the river speak there as well. I'm going to keep it moving, but I think Sarah brought up a very important point. It is a lot of fun to pretend to be an unknowing white woman. And I recommend everybody do it every Friday. That's what I just find some sweatpants that say sexy on the butt. And then I go to yoga and I just, go to brunch and just act wild as hell. I go to the river, I go, I don't even care. It's so much fun. I'm just gonna take a sip of water now from my not plastic bottle. Come for me, Rachel, I dare you, because you will find nothing here. It tastes better. It tastes better when it's sustainable too, ladies and gentlemen, and other humans that escape the binary. Speaking of unknowing, I think one of the most interesting things is my ignorance, which is that I had no idea that the Chicago River had been forced to, it had been redirected to go backwards as early as 1900s. And I think so often when we talk about social issues like the current crisis around water, which we might not necessarily feel here in the Great Lakes, which is the largest source of fresh water outside of the melting polar ice caps in the world, where it's still kind of plentiful for us. 2/3 of the water is living in water scarce regions. And I believe I think there's an estimation that half of all the hospital beds in the world are filled with people that are there with water related illnesses at this point. And so I'm saying that because even when we think about these water issues, right, they have a continuity. And we talk so much, especially in social justice circles, about the intensity and novelty of an issue, but something like water, those stats that I just rattled off, or even our own Chicago River, has a deep history. And so I think it points to what the second panel and segment that we're gonna be talking about addresses, which is the theme of slow violence. Some people like their violence fast, some people like their violence slow. If you're capitalism, you just try and do it all the time. You're like, yo, we can affirm everything. It's a very affirmative force, capital. But I also think, speaking of capitalism, the notion of slow violence actually reminds us that capital has a long durée of which it's been operating as an oppressive force. And so I will not talk about this. I'll let our panel talk about slow violence. So I'd like to welcome from UIC Freshwater Lab, Erica Chavez, also from UIC Freshwater Lab, Becky Lyons, and from the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, LVEJO. I put the ho in LVEJO though, don't let them take that away from me. Let's give it up for Brenda Santoyo Gomez and Jeremiah Mohammed. So we're here to talk about weapons of slow violence is the title of this segment. And so I just kind of want to open it up with a, with one pointing to, you can go to the website, the Backward River, and there is kind of the archive there around slow violence materials. But just let's define the term for everybody. So would you all like to kind of talk about slow violence and what it means and how you see it both in your life and also, with respect to water?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. My name is Erica Chavez. Thank you all for joining us today. So the concept of slow violence is one that was initially developed by this man called Rob Nixon, and essentially it has three main components. One is that it is violence that happens gradually and on site. These are the qualifiers that he outlined, and that it often results in a delayed destruction, often dispersed across space and time. So as a result, it exacerbates the vulnerability of ecosystems and the people who are poor and disempowered, which we'll go back on in just a minute. And in turn, erodes the quality of life. It leads to displacement and it fuels social conflicts and instability. And so when we considered this concept of slow violence, as it was presented by Rob Nixon, we as a group realized that we had some issues with some of these things, right? One of them is this idea that slow violence occurs out of sight. We know through our work as part of this project and beyond that mostly violence, fast and slow, happens very visibly, and that it disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. The problem is that those Black and Brown communities and people are often marginalized, not heard, dismissed, and so on and so forth. And so we pulled on other different concepts from other individuals and expanded on this idea of slow violence. And we pushed against the idea, again, that it happens to people who are vulnerable and powerless, because we have our own examples here in Chicago. One that's playing out right in front of us right now. We know that the city has approved the relocation of a plant that just decimates the communities that surround it. And a lot of our attention and information and knowledge about this particular injustice has been made by those who are directly burdened by this. So they're not powerless, they're not visible. It's just that systemic wise, we've made the decision to often dismiss and not listen to these people. But the people who are directly impacted by slow violence are the ones that are calling our attention to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Becky, I think you unmuted because you had something to add.
Yeah, so I think, that's such a great description, Erica. And I think she was kind of our person leading sort of how we could take this concept and take it to a new level. So something we were talking about as we were kind of unpacking this is also kind of the weapons of slow violence. We wanted to build that in and thinking about, what is slow violence and what are these pieces that we can put together. So then we were kind of thinking about those weapons, right, of urban flooding, water shutoffs, lead pipes across the city, as well as things that are sort of less environmentally related, just like economic disinvestment, closed schools, closed public housing, and kind of trying to build all of those things together and to show how they're intertwined as weapons that harm Black and Brown communities. And then and then kind of opposing that, we came up with this idea of a toolkit, whereas tools build communities, weapons break them down. So it was a cool process to kind of use this new lens to think about environmental racism and racialized capitalism and how it is baked into the river system.
So, I'm thinking about that, and I think that for, Brenda and Jeremiah, I guess one of the things that I'm wondering, right, is you all live in Little Village, which is, known as a hub of environmental offense. And you got a lot to worry about. So why are you worried about the water? Does the river even go there? Can you talk to us a little bit about the relationship of, your work with LVEJO and Little Village and the water and the, and the river, and also this notion of slow violence and how it speaks to your work there?
Well, actually, I'm no longer in Chicago. I'm in East Tennessee, right outside of the Tennessee River. So, that's my new relationship with water or the river, so to speak. But when I work here at the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, that's a mouthful. We, a lot of our work with the Collateral Channel has historically focused on how it impacts, members of the community and surrounding areas, especially from a standpoint of green space or the season where you may hear a lot of flare-ups where the pollution, the smell, things of that nature. When we look at concepts of slow violence in Little Village, I'm pretty sure most, if not all of you all have heard about the coal power plant shutdown that was shut down some years ago, but also the new fight that's going on with Hillco Industries. But or the number of diesel trucks in the community that contribute to the slow violence effect that comes in with this intersectionality of the fast violence that is prevalent in the community as well. But so a lot of our work on the river, the river, the Collateral Channel, correlates with that. I had something else. But Brenda, if you want to jump in, you can go ahead. But
yeah, I think that was a really good rundown of everything, Jeremiah. I think probably the thing that you were missing was I think the Little Village residents relationship with water is kind of how was mentioned in the South Branch. These people who live around the canal or just the river, they don't have access to recreational space when it comes to actually using this water, just because it's polluted, it's toxic. Like Jeremiah was saying, depending on the season or the time of the day, the fumes from the canal, they go into the La Villita Park, which is one of the very few open green spaces for recreational activity within the community. So making sure that the community members have access to access to the park without being bothered by those fumes is something that is concerning. And then in terms of slow violence, Jeremiah was talking about the coal plant, how that was shut down, and now there's the fight with Hillco and the warehouses that are popping up in the southwest side. There's maps all over the place, the Chicago air quality maps. The NRDC has maps that show that communities that are within proximity to facilities of this sort bear a higher environmental burden. And that's evident as Little Village has one of the highest asthma rates within the city of Chicago. And I think if you think about the current disaster, the pandemic that's going on now, and how those conditions are exacerbated, it kind of changes the concept of slow violence to something that's more immediate and urgent, because you're seeing higher death rates and higher infection rates in the Little Village zip code, which is another thing to consider. But yeah, I don't know if Jeremiah has anything else.
I guess the last thing I would say is, I don't think anyone mentioned, is that what speeds up slow violence a lot are the policies that are in place in the city, cities like Chicago. So you have these policies that have historically, disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities. You mentioned earlier housing, but you look at planning, you look at public health, you look at education system, and all of those play a part in, actually speeding up the process, but also, the deregulation of a lot of things that increases, that allows industry to come into these communities, or General Iron to relocate to, another environmental justice community and continue to pollute and poison and harm those people down there. When you look at intersectionality, or you look at how everything correlates, or whatever causal relationships you want, what words you want to use, it is pretty evident. And when you start coming up to trying to come up with the theme of what entails slow violence.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because so all of environmental injustice, I would argue, is predicated upon two ideas, right? Which is extractive logic. Well, even when we think about colonization, one of the things they first did when they were traveling through the world was taking natural resources and refining them, right? To be able to turn profits and for accumulation, and then disposability, right? Because everything has a cost that isn't necessarily measured in profits, right? But there can oftentimes be a human cost, right? And so I think one of the things when we're talking about slow violence, hearing some of this, right? And for those that might not be in Chicago, Hilco is a corporation that demolished a plant in Little Village, a Mexican-American immigrant mecca on the southwest side of the city, that ended up covering that community, endangering thousands of lives during a respiratory pandemic with particulate matter. But moreover, right, it also kind of had additional kind of fallout. Like, for example, I was talking with Juliana Pino Alcaraz from, one of your colleagues at LVEJO, and one of the things that she was talking about was how the shock from the demolition has likely disrupted the kind of copper pipes to pollute, to contaminate the drinking water there. And so it kind of makes me think about, Erica, you did some work around water quality. I'm just saying water quality. I feel like I'm like my 3-year-old cousin right now. I'm like, water quality. But you did some work around water quality and around a water quality report. Can you talk to us? I guess what I'm interested in, one, girl, what's a water quality report? 2, what constitutes, right? What is measured exactly and captured within this notion of water quality? And also, what are the barriers for people to understanding, right, water?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you have to ask what is a water quality report signifies how problematic it is, right, given that we are a city that lives by one of the largest sources of fresh water, yet many of its residents have very little knowledge in terms of what they're actually drinking and what the quality of that drinking water is. And what are the factors that contribute to the quality of that water, including polluters, industries that, have over the most recent years been able to freely just pollute, without any kind of care. But I think one of the things that all of these things have in common in terms of what our water quality are the veil that we have, whether intentional, conscious, or unconscious, over our eyes around issues of slow violence, is this disconnect between what we live and experience every day as it relates to water, whether we walk, across the bridge over the river, when we turn on our faucets, and the things that make that possible. And so I think one of the things that I like in terms of what Tonika said earlier is that once we start understanding things about water quality and the relationship and that has in terms of the water access that we have, once we start making all these connections, essentially what ends up happening is that we start making we start coming up with new ideas and start making these imagined worlds possible in terms of what we want to see for ourselves in relationship with the river in this context, in our drinking water in a broader context.
I think it's, I'm thinking about that, right? Because it's you're talking about the imagining possibility, but the reality is that right now so much of imagination, who has the monopoly on it, right, is an oligarchy that's comprised of government and private elite. And so I'm saying that because I think one of the things that Jeremiah brought up was deregulation, right? And so it points back to this notion of kind of like of policy. And so I guess this question is for Becky, because I think your work is around some of this stuff. One of the things we've seen in recent years is the continuing privatization of water. And so if you can talk a little bit about what that water privatization means for Chicago and here in Illinois, and to Erica's point, the importance of being able to imagine, right, at a very organic and grassroots level, alternatives, resistance, and other futures for ours than the one that capital and our city and state leaders might try and consign us to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to, like you said, to understand the situation that we're in, where these corporations, these oligarchs, have so much power. So water privatization is essentially these private corporations extracting our water and then selling it back to us to make a profit. So there's a couple main ways that happens. And one way is through bottled water. So corporations like Nestle, Pepsi, Coke, bottling water, telling us it's inherently better quality, and then selling it back to us to make a profit. And then the other way is private corporations operating municipal water systems. So I actually have been doing a podcast about this. It's called The Water Chronicles. You can link to it from the Backward River site. And so I've been looking at this issue across Illinois. And essentially, again, there's a bunch of places, cities, towns across the state and across the country where these private corporations operate drinking water systems and wastewater systems. And what we found is, no surprise, people pay more than double water rates when they have private water versus public water. And then, so that's not great. And then there's other things that come when you privatize a public system, right? Loss of transparency, accountability to people. Quality and safety of water often goes down, right? Because they're cutting corners, trying to make more of a profit. We saw this last year in University Park in Illinois. There was a lead and water crisis because Aqua Illinois, who was running their water, changed the system, changed the chemicals they were using, and didn't run it by the EPA. And all of this disproportionately harms Black and Brown communities and low-income communities the most. So water privatization is not great. And in Chicago, we have city water. We are lucky that it's not privatized yet, although Rahm Emanuel considered it. Surprise. But we still have to worry. Well, we still have been a little bit disenfranchised from our water, right? There's not a lot of transparency and accountability for these water shutoffs that have been happening for people who can't afford their water bills. And so all of these systems, whether they're private or public, need to become more democratized. We hugely have to invest in water infrastructure. Federal funding's been slashed in the last 50 years, and combine that with our neoliberal policies, we've just been not investing in water. So yeah, I love this idea that people keep bringing up about needing to imagine and reimagine our water and our relationship with it. That's definitely something we talked about a lot during this project. And when it comes to water infrastructure, whether that's drinking water or what's going on in the river, I mean, we need a Green New Deal that's centering water, right? Where we're hugely investing in water infrastructure and in water jobs, so that we can bring this into, the 21st century and future, right? Not just acceptable water, not just, not smelly, not polluted water, but a future where water is the center.
Girl, I want to be the center. I want to be the decolonial center. That's what I want to be. But I do want to kind of, we are at time, so I do want to close out. But I do want to close out with a sentence, please. So it's beginning, middle, end, period, whatever, however they define it, noun, verb, of what people can do, or what they should, the minute this event ends at 6 p.m., when they go Google what they should kind of look up, both for informing themselves and to inform or transform themselves or or their communities.
Yeah, I'd like to. The first thing I think everyone should do is visit thebackwardriver.org, because we've placed together a toolkit that can help you understand some of these concepts around slow violence and weapons of slow violence. And you'll hear more about the industrialization and commercialization of the river later on, but really understand what those concepts are, and then provides you with actionable items and resources that you can take to move some of these things forward in your own communities, in your own household, and so on and so forth. So definitely visit thebackwardriver.org.
Yes, Erica, plug it. Let them know, Erica, let them know. Becky, how about you?
Yeah, Erica took my line. We put a lot in our toolkit that you can do. But I mean, I would also add like following these live things that are happening of like General Iron trying to move to the southeast side. LVEJO's work trying to keep Hilco out. There's just a new warehouse that's supposed to open in Pilsen. You can also be calling your alder people, following along with these local things if you're in Chicago or in Illinois, or see what's going on in your city related to water and make your voice heard.
I mean, you can call your alder person if you're in Little Village, but it's Mike Rodriguez, and he'll likely not do nothing.
True.
My opinions are not reflective of the UIC Freshwater Lab. These are of the Brenda, speaking of Little Village, but doing something, Brenda and Jeremiah, what is some knowledge you can, and some directions you can give us to close out on?
Well, I want to take this time to, playfully embarrass Brenda. So I put her blog that she co-wrote with NRDC, Jeremy Orr from NRDC, on Chicago land Latinx communities and the water barrier. I mean, the barriers they face with water access. She did a really great job on that. After you all get off of this Zoom call, please read that. Don't blush, Brenda. I'm about to post another one of your reports. And another report, a joint snapshot report that we did with our partners over at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, is a snapshot report on water and health in Little Village. It deals with urban flooding during the pandemic. So I'll put that in the chat as well.
I mean, so Brenda, do you have anything? You want to get more grief with time? We're reading your articles apparently now, the Brenda Santoyo reading list.
Yeah, I would say no, I mean, like, I mean, just going off of what Becky was saying, I think one of like the biggest thing is like staying up to date with like what's happening locally. I feel like the city always like is moving when it comes to like regulation or deregulation. So making sure staying up to date with that. I know that there's a lot going on with like urban flooding and like lead service lines at the city level, among like other things like water shutoffs. So I think a good start is like probably following community organizations on like social media. I know like we at LVEJO are like really active at like posting those things online and like trying to inform the community, educate them on like what's going on. I know NRDC has like some awesome stuff. They've been really good at uplifting our work among CNT and like others that like we have partnered with. So they're all like really good hubs of information if you want to learn more.
That's awesome. And I think if we can have someone from the UIC Freshwater Lab drop some of those links into the Facebook comments on the Facebook live stream, that'd be great. Let's give it up for Brenda, Jeremiah, Becky, and Erika. We're gonna keep these rolling. We're gonna keep these segments rolling now that we are running a little behind. My favorite word is behind, not just because I'm gay. I just like the way it sounds, the B and then the sharp D at the end. And we are going to keep it moving with our next segment, which is The River is a Pipeline. And we are really excited to have from the Freshwater Lab, the Holy Trinity of Rachel Haverlock, Kathleen Blackburn, and Citlali Trujillo. Let's give it up. You give some little clap emojis, whatever you want, and let's welcome them. Yes, come through, hands. Feel like I'm in like a gay high school showgirls choir thing. So I want to kind of get this started. So this is, this segment, this panel is entitled "The Chicago River is a Pipeline." And when I think of kind of pipeline, I think about oil pipelines, right? Usually that the crisis that usually emerge from those, and so it's kind of interesting to name the Chicago River a pipeline. I'm a good host, so I did my research and read the website about it, but I'm gonna pretend I don't know so I can ask you about it. So Rachel, Kathleen, Sitlali, when we're talking about the Chicago River being a pipeline, what do we mean? All right, was that good? Did I seem like I didn't know? Okay, good.
You seemed it was completely impromptu.
Really hard for me to get there.
So yeah, I think a lot of people tuning in, and thank you everyone for tuning in, know that I spend a lot of my life following pipelines and seeing what they do to social space. And so this kind of provocative but true claim that the Chicago River is a pipeline, it came to me on the one hand, traveling around these waterways and just seeing the degree to which they are lined by refineries and traveled by barges and contaminated by coal ash, and just how much energy is concentrated on these rivers. And that got us to the next point of who's actually running and managing these rivers. And the answer to that is the Army Corps of Engineers, who also does things like green light pipelines, like unfortunately Line 3 across Ojibwe lands in Minnesota that received a green light today. So I think it's quite factual that it's a pipeline, but what we're also doing with that claim is that pipelines only come into our vision when they spill and when they're breached. And this river is not something that is contained. Even though it might have hard concrete banks, this is something that floods with untreated wastewater when we have big rainstorms in the Chicago area. So like a pipeline, it spills and it breaches and it comes into public view mostly when it fails. But the other thing we're doing with this claim that the Chicago River is a pipeline is that kind of common discourse on the media, in books, people love to marvel at this river because it runs backwards. It was the world's greatest engineering. Chicago figured out how to send all of its waste across the United States to spill out into the Gulf of Mexico. So people like to marvel at it. And one way to kind of break through that like touristic marveling was to like call this thing what it is. It's something that is traveled by barges that seem kind of quaint in 19th century, but they're hauling the waste products of refining, right? It's getting in people's lungs and neighborhoods along this water. And even more obscene, I'd say, the public is subsidizing the movement of fossil fuels on barges on our public water to the tune of about $2 billion a year. So we're literally paying for our own pollution. And the last thing I want to say on this one is that, when we stick to the word river for something that offshores Chicago's waste and allows the Koch brothers, right, to move their fossil fuels on public waterways, we start to think, oh, a river is natural. And there's things that belong here and things that don't belong here. But when you start to frame it as a pipeline, everything that moves through a pipeline is introduced, right? It kind of takes away that whole quaint frame that repeatedly causes us to misunderstand what this waterway is. And as long as we misunderstand it, we're going to keep paying chemical and fossil fuel producers to do us harm instead of subsidizing those water jobs and that water future that Brenda and Becky and Erica were speaking about.
Go, Rachel. I mean, I just feel like I know I have all, it's like the aesthetics of pipelining. It sounds like a dissertation that I'm going to come up.
I mean, it is my life. Okay, where are my girls though here?
Kathleen and Sitlali, anything you guys would like to add? Because I got other questions. That was pretty. Keep going. All right, I'm gonna do it. I think Kathleen, one of the things that I've been hearing, and I is a lot about I never even heard this Asian carp. That was kind of really introduced and became kind of a bigger conversation for those that, you know, for someone like me that's peripheral to environmental justice circles, and kind of started hearing it blow up more in public discourse and activist discourse. Can you talk to us about what that is exactly and how it pertains to reality here in Chicago?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So
I got more. These questions are free. Just ask if you want. It's all good.
That's awesome. So I'm going to answer that question in two ways. The first, I'm going to answer it in terms of kind of what's happening and how public discourse has sort of captured some of those facts around the river. And then I want to talk about how this story of Asian carp relates to what we've been talking about: systemic violence, what we call the river, the language that we use when we approach environmental issues. So there are 4 species of carp under the moniker Asian carp. The big stars in this version of the story are the big head carp and silver carp. So some of you have probably seen pictures of silverfish flying out of the water whenever there's like a big fishing boat with a motor, and that's the silver carp. The big head carp are these, true to their name, close to 100-pound fish that dwell along the water of along the bottom of rivers. So, one thing that I think everyone comes to the table around is the fact that the carp are imported around in order to be a kind of natural fertilizer, actually for catfish ponds in Arkansas. But stories start to diverge from there. The story that's kind of circulating widely in public discourse is that the carp escaped from these catfish ponds during flooding events and extreme storms.
Yes, liberate yourself, carp, liberate yourself.
Yes, yeah. And then eventually wound up in the Mississippi River. Liberated as far as the Mississippi River. What often, and I'll add, and then they're sort of slowly moving up the river system. And we know that because of our sanitary and ship canal, that the Mississippi watershed is connected to the Great Lakes watershed. So the fear here is that these carp, which I should mention, have voracious appetites for plankton. They eat a lot, but they only eat really one thing. And they tend to out-eat the fish that were in the water prior to their arrival. So they really can disrupt kind of an ecological food chain. And the fear is that if they get into the lakes, they will disrupt the fishing industry, the current ecosystem. We can talk more about that in a minute. And also the recreational industry, because nobody wants to go water skiing with a bunch of fish flying around unless you're like really extreme in your recreational time.
That's what I'd do it. Now that would make me do it.
And I think that you should let people know, maybe, because part of what you're speaking to is how we adapt to the arrival of the fish, and maybe skiing with them wouldn't be such a bad idea. But there's a few things that the story I've just told mobilizes. When we call carp Asian carp and racialize them that way, when we focus on the fact that they escaped from catfish ponds and are swimming and teeming toward the Great Lakes, they are sort of propped up as invaders. That's innate in the language of invasive species. And part of what we wanted to do with this project was to think about what happens when we evoke that language, right? I'm not arguing that these fish don't pose some problems, but the issue is when we define the problems of the river systems, especially Illinois river systems, the Mississippi river systems, as a problem of carp, then we can dismiss or ignore or turn our focus away from the issues of systemic racism, of toxicity, of flooding. Basically, the way that these issues are all connected to one another, and just define the problem as a fish that doesn't belong. I mean, this is part of what, Rachel was talking about with when we call it a river, we start to get sort of wrapped up in a discourse of what belongs, what doesn't belong. In invasive discourse, this sounds, this becomes pretty xenophobic in sort of its language of the native versus the non-native. When we were talking with or hearing from the Slow Violence group, they were talking about the violence that's happening around our river systems is actually quite visible. But one of the things that the carp do when they get propped up in a particular way as invaders is that they sort of create part of that veil that Erica was talking about that keeps us from looking at this whole system of issues. So what we are really wanting to do in calling the river a pipeline is to think about what's moving through that pipeline. And it's not just carp, it's barges, it's toxicity, it's teeming with sort of runoff from industrial agriculture. And once we start to define the problem more broadly, then we can really start to move, I think, to some kind of systemic change.
Snaps. Went from colloquial Asian carp to xenophobic narratives to runoff. Thank you, Kathleen. Take a sip of that wine, you earned it. So, technically, this panel was slated to end in 3 minutes, but I do want to kind of, there's so much more to talk about. So I'm going to let us go a little bit longer, and I'm just going to make you all talk faster. And so we're going to play a little game. I have my phone out here. I'm going to set the timer for 30 seconds. And when I say your name and a vocab word that's associated with the river being a pipeline, you tell us what it means and how it affects us. So Rachel, since you are the expert on all this, you founded this whole lab, you get to go first. And the word I'd like to throw out at you is, what is a dead zone? Go.
A dead zone is a place where nothing can live because of the excess nutrients of nitrogen and phosphorus. This comes from human waste and it comes from industrial agriculture. There's one in the Gulf of Mexico. It is the size of New Jersey, and the city of Chicago and our wastewater is deeply implicated in it. We gotta capture this waste. We have to turn it into something of value.
Seconds, you think that if you've dedicated your life to this, you'd be able to be a little bit more concise. Just want to throw that out there. Let's do Citlali. What is the deep tunnel?
Okay, the deep tunnel consists of 3 reservoirs and 109 miles of underground pipelines that hold water during rain events and staggered arrival at treatment plants. It answered a federal mandate to protect our drinking water, reduce floods and backups, and improve water quality of Illinois waterways. However, it is 45 years behind processes of climate change, urbanization, and population growth. And even with the deep tunnel in place.
Citlali, that deep tunnel is just gonna have to stay a little deeper because it's time. Kathleen, what is the Chicago diversion?
The Chicago diversion is a pact. Rachel, you might have to jump in on this with me, but it basically is a pact that, a policy that determines how much water can be extracted from the lake. And this was done in order to kind of protect the watershed, as like water scarcity is sort of increasing around the world. This was just something that was put in place to make sure that we're able to keep our water here. Rachel, am I missing anything?
Well, the Chicago diversion is the Chicago River, is the canal, right? This is all the process by which Chicago pulls water from Lake Michigan to distribute to suburbs and ourselves and to flush, right? Again, we send all of our wastewater, right, through the canal, down the Des Plaines, the Illinois, the Mississippi, to the Gulf of Mexico. It is the world's biggest toilet. And this is what we call the Chicago River.
Okay, great. Well, good for you all. This is good. That's, you did okay. Let's go ahead and do a team round. This will be 1 minute for you all to talk to us about specifically how much does the public spend on the Chicago airway waterway system, and what else could we do with that money? And this must include a 10-second intro into exactly what the hell is the Chicago area waterway system. And I am starting that clock now.
Okay, Chicago area waterway system is the river, the Cal-Sag Channel, everything that ends up going down into the Gulf of Mexico. We subsidize its operation. That's you, Cook County taxpayers, to the tune of about $2 billion, which means we keep the Koch brothers on welfare. I'm passing to Sitlali.
Oh, geez. Let's see.
Do flood damages.
Flood damages. Oh, geez. Okay. Well, the deep tunnel is actually designed to prevent flooding. Yeah, you know what? This is too hard.
Okay, I wrote them down. Flood damages, and we have to have a shout out to Marcelo Bondi-Keenan, who is the expert on flooding and race. So flood damages between 2007 and 2016 were about $400 million. 87% of those claims were filed by people of color. Households of color are disproportionately impacted by urban flooding. So we got $2 billion a year to keep the Koch brothers on welfare, the deep tunnel about $4 billion, hundreds of millions of flooding, along with the tax subsidies and abatements for polluting corporations. Okay, we at the Backward River have a plan. It is the Army Corps of Engineers. Kathleen, what do they want to build for about $1 billion?
Another channelized sort of checkpoint for invasive species.
As Summer, as our wonderful speaker from Palestine knows, the Army Corps of Engineers basically wants to build a checkpoint for carp, right? They call them invasive, voracious, dangerous, and threatening, and they want billions of dollars for the Army Corps of Engineers to build a checkpoint to keep out the carp and let the barges and the chemical projects through. So
I want to hear Trump to say a bunch of racist things about carp. He'd be like the Kung Fu carp or whatever it is.
I know there's a crazy story that we tell on the Backward River, because the man did get involved in all of this, but he's not part of our 30 seconds unless you want. But in other words, we're spending billions of dollars as a public for things that harm us collectively, but disproportionately put burden after burden on communities of color. So if we're really doing this just transition.
Right, so it's over 1 minute, girl. It's been like.
Can I shut it down at least in my 1 minute and then I'm done?
Okay, go ahead.
Shut this thing down in my 1 minute and then I'm totally done. But billions of dollars. So you know what we have to do with Chicago's wastewater? We've got to capture it. We've got to recycle it. We are going to sell this water to those Midwest states that are out of it. Instead of paying to offshore waste, we're going to build an industry of reusing and recycling this waste in ways that are community driven and worker first.
I mean, a disregard for rules, I hope, you just. Sitlali, I'd like to close out on you because I understand some of your research is actually around what community members have to say about other ways that we could be using the river and the canal and some of their visions of that. Can you talk to us about some of that work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently conducting a survey for residents of Pilsen. Pilsen is bordered, and Little Village are bordered by the Sanitary and Ship Canal. So there's a lot of industrial corridors around that area. So community members would like to see that open space around the river and canal be properly maintained by the city. And they want to see development that's actually beneficial to the community, especially the youth. And they want to see the area be more inviting. Right now, the open space is surrounded by abandoned silos, inactive barges, a lot of garbage, and just a lot of diesel trucks. So I encourage people who are watching this and reside in these communities to fill out and share, fill out the surveys that I will be posting soon, and share their ideas and visions as well for the community.
Yes. Let's give it up for Rachel, Kathleen, and Citlali. Thank you so much for educating us. The river is a pipeline. I like those little cartoon hands. I also like it because I can show my nails, my Queen's Gambit homage piece. Let's give it up and let's keep things moving. So I'm really excited about this next panel because, again, it's so important to stay local, but also our community sometimes can have a broader scope and a broader scale. And so I'm so excited to think about what does it mean to be in a community with other cities that are confronting some of the politics of freshwater in the Great Lakes. And so this next segment is Fresh Media from the Great Lakes Watershed. From Detroit, we got Sandra Swoboda. Whenever I don't know how to pronounce the name really well, I'm worried I just say it in Spanish. That's like the Mexican in me. So Swoboda, we got Sandra from the program director of Great Lakes Now and the field producer and narrator from Great Lakes Now. We also have Nick Austin. Say hi, Sandra, and say hi, Nick, so we can see you all. And we're also joining us is from the Milwaukee Water Commons, the communication manager, Ann Bull. And we also have Rachel Haverlock because she just can't get enough of talking about freshwater here from Chicago. So I think, how's everyone doing? Nick, Sandra, how are we doing? Nice. And
I'm doing well. I'm glad to know there's so many Swobodas in Latin-speaking countries or Spanish-speaking countries also. So that's good to know.
I love that. Like you totally have newscaster narrator voice right over here. It was like, I'm doing well. I was like, okay. And Anne, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, my name is Anne. I'm with Milwaukee Water Commons.
Rachel, we know you're doing well. You are just running the facts. You have receipts. You are doing the water game. I think what we want to start off with this panel is seeing some excerpts of the media. Is that correct? Yeah. Well, how about we start off with Great Lakes Now. We're just going to be listening to Nick narrating things, that voice, Sandra helping put it together. Let's go.
Okay. Well, I like this opportunity because we get to lighten it up a little bit, I think. There have been a lot of really deep discussions here in the last hour, and I've actually taken a lot of notes and learned a lot towards our program. Great Lakes Now is a half-hour program. We air on several PBS stations around the Great Lakes. We're in 6 states, and a lot of Ontario, Canada can see us as well. We are not on the air in Chicago at the moment. So, just saying, if you guys need any activist projects there, a little lobbying may not hurt. But we do, in our program and on our website, greatlakesnow.org, on the site, we have daily news and information about the Great Lakes from our own writers, from media collaborations that we have, and the Associated Press wire service. And then we have in the monthly show, the 3 segments. It's a half-hour long. We're going to show you one of them about the Chicago River. We cover all the lakes. We cover the connectors. We cover the communities on the lakes. We cover freshwater drinking issues, issues of water equity, affordability, quality. In Michigan, we're certainly no stranger to issues with drinking water. #Flint water crisis. In the Detroit bankruptcy, which I actually covered for Detroit Public Radio, which was where I met Nick, because he has a radio show on public radio as well. But even as part of the Detroit bankruptcy, what happened with regional water was a huge part of that case. So, here in the mitten, we are very aware of our position in the middle of the Great Lakes, affected by all of them. And so in our program, Great Lakes Now, we really try to build that sense of shared stewardship of the lakes, the commonality of experiencing issues with water, drinking water, the lakes, everything that's been described in this program over the last hour. So we try to bring those in our work and reporting, in event, and in the show. But what you're going to see about the Chicago River is actually a pretty positive story, I think. Nick, do you want to give a little preview of the segment while I get the share screen ready?
It's a positive story involving Chicago and water.
Right. I know. I feel like we're like countering everything that's been said here.
Way to go. We want to hear about environmental violence. None of this frou-frou cute shit, but let's go. Let's see it.
All right, Ricardo. I'm sure you're going to find something in this, but you will see the legacy of the industry, the commercialization of the river. But let me show you the segment. This is actually the second one. We went back and did it as an update. The first one explained the project, and this talks about what happened with it. So let me make the magic of Zoom work. And
in September of 2019, we told you about an interesting project that placed floating gardens in the Chicago River. At the time, nobody knew what effect this would have on the fish population, but now there are some encouraging findings, so we bring you this update.
Throughout the world, most cities have gone through a process of widening, straightening, dredging their rivers to create this sort of shipping system. And, you know, the process of that was at the detriment to the wildlife that was originally there. So one of the real big missions of this is to create a model for how you would build an ecosystem in a river within a densely populated urban area.
Nick Wesley is one of the co-founders of Urban Rivers, the group that is working to create Wild Mile, a mile-long floating eco-park within the Chicago River.
Urban waterways have had a lot of different abuse over the years. The Chicago River, for one, was reversed, basically to move sewage instead of in Lake Michigan to other areas down south and in the Gulf of Mexico. And so with this history and this legacy of pollution and mistreatment, the Wild Mile kind of creates this new space where the focus is the habitat, the wildlife, the health of the river in general.
One of the most innovative features of the Wild Mile is a series of floating garden islands.
So I'm on the floating garden that we just installed, and you can see a lot of these plants, which were planted about 2 weeks ago, are really just starting to come in. We use these floating garden modules to do a few things. One is to create habitat for the areas around it, and it does it by having plants that grow directly through the system and having the roots freely suspended within the river. It creates habitat for fish and other wildlife. It also creates a space for birds and insects to kind of congregate and really create this ecosystem within it.
The first islands were installed in 2017. That year, 60 floating gardens were put in place. This summer, an additional 170 were added along the river. The Wild Mile is intended to both strengthen the community's connection to the river and host scientific research into the river's ecology. The goal is to create an environment for habitat as well as new opportunities for recreation and education.
Welcome to Kayak for Conservation.
Shed Aquarium has been getting people in the community involved in river restoration through a program called Kayak for Conservation. Volunteers have been collecting data along the river since 2018. Jackie Maidoff is the manager of conservation stewardship for the Shed Aquarium.
The kayak program is meant to get people out here on the Chicago River and experience it firsthand. We have different types of programs to meet people at their comfort levels. So sometimes that's just a tour where they're coming out and learning, and other times that's coming out and getting their hands dirty and giving back to the river. So that could be anything from litter monitoring to wildlife monitoring, anything from fish to waterfowl to turtles. And that helps give us a baseline for where wildlife is in the canal and how they're using the space as we continue to build out the canal with islands.
Yeah, if we get a little farther down, there's definitely turtles.
The connection to the river is so important because in order to continue improving the Chicago River, we need people who care for it. And in order to have people who care for it, they need to have a relationship with it in the first place. The most rewarding part of this program for me is seeing the change in people and their feelings about the Chicago River from before and after being out on the river. So a lot of times people come and they have not so good opinions about the Chicago River, and they leave and are just amazed at the things that they saw out there.
Data collected by volunteers is helping scientists like Austin Happel, a research biologist with Chicago's Shedd Aquarium, who is working to identify the impact the islands have on the river's fish population.
So in a lot of urban areas, rivers have been channelized, which means the sides of them have been dug straight down and the bottom of the river has been kind of scoured flat. And when that happens, there's no habitat for fish. Fish love structure and love hiding around things. They'll usually spawn on structures. But when rivers are channelized like that, there's nothing really there for them. These artificial floating wetlands kind of add additional aspects to those in that they're roots that are hanging down from the surface of the water. And so roots can suck up nutrients, they can help with adding oxygen to the waterway, they can allow invertebrates to live within the roots, and then fish can hide not only amongst them, but around them and spawn within those roots.
Much of Austin's research is done at night. He collects fish and data to try and determine if fish are using the floating islands.
One thing I'm really interested in is if fish are using them as spawning habitat. So throughout the summer, I go out there and place larval light traps, which are a means of collecting larval fish, which are baby fish that aren't great at swimming quite yet, but they seem to be attracted into these light traps. And then we can use that to assess our fish spawning near these islands more than they are other structures or other parts of the river.
Back at Shedd Aquarium, Austin analyzes the larval fish he collected on the islands.
Over here we have fish caught in late August, set up in our microscope so that we can look at it and try to identify what it is. We also have a scale under the microscope, and that scale is used to get measurements of how big that fish is.
Austin discovered that a variety of native species were using the floating habitats. And many more species than he expected were calling the islands home.
These are some species that we identified using both the camera and using genetic ID. Species I expected to find were the common carp and the goldfish and the fathead minnow. Ones I was kind of surprised at finding were things like this white sucker and these golden shiner and spotfin shiners. These are native species, and it's really cool to see them in that part of the river. I was hoping to find anything at these islands, and so it was really great to be able to find 10 species spawning in that area, and a lot of them being native species. So that was really exciting to see.
Austin's research could indicate that more islands in the river may mean more fish.
This year, they're even adding more islands, so they're expanding the surface area that these wetlands take up. And so hopefully that means even more space for fish to hang out under and spawn on. And I'm interested in trying to see if we start seeing more and more of that happening.
The river is changing from its, primary need being a waste dispersion method to actually being something of an ecological asset for the people around it. So I think we're getting close to the day where people will assume that a river has always been this ecological bounty within their city, instead of what it is now, where it's kind of an afterthought. And that future, I think, is soon.
At Great Lakes Now, we aim to cover the Great Lakes region and the people who live here, like you. Please follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and sign up for our newsletter at greatlakesnow.org.
Oh, that was our segment.
Give it up for Sandra and Nick. And why don't we, Anne, check out what the Milwaukee Water Commons has for us as well, and then we can have a larger conversation afterwards. Does that sound great for everyone? Yes, give me the thumbs up. Yes, Sandra, head nod. Yes, Anne is in too. Okay, we are all ready to go. Anne, how about, will you be running your media from your computer?
Yeah, yep. I've got a 5-minute
video. It's 5 different segments of a Water Connects Us video series that we started this summer. Milwaukee is on the at the confluence of 3 different rivers and on the shores of Lake Michigan. So we've got a lot of water here, and we thought this could be a really cool way to engage our community in a year when, you know, we couldn't have our normal events. So we reached out to a bunch of community partners and asked for video submissions, short video submissions. And we mainly use these on social media. But I will just get right into it and play this for you all.
So I'm out here today at the lake. It's a perfect day. Good boy. I grew up in Santa Monica, California, near the Pacific Ocean. Lake Michigan, look how beautiful it is. And going to the beach every weekend was a must, to be near the water. I always knew that water was a basic need.
I'm Connor Andrews, and I'm a swim coach, swimmer, and community partner of Milwaukee Water Commons. I just finished a nice brisk swim in beautiful Lake Michigan up here in Eagle Harbor. When I think how water connects us, I think of water being from which all of life came. We all came from the same place when it comes down to it. And everybody has a human right to clean water. No matter who you are or where you came from, you deserve clean water. It hydrates us, keeps us healthy. So make sure that you get in touch with your local nonprofits to see how you can better become a steward of your local waterways, as well as changing daily habits, even in small ways. It all adds up, and we can ensure a healthy future for generations to come.
Hi everyone, my name is Angelito Tenorio. I work for Wisconsin Conservation Voters, and I am an alderman here in the great city of West Allis. Water is life. Water is beauty. Water creates life, and water is powerful. If we're not careful, water can also destroy life. Water connects us all, from the great islands on the Pacific Ocean, the Philippines, where my ancestors were raised, to the shores of Lake Michigan here in Wisconsin. I am blessed to have water in all aspects of my life. Water is something we need to treasure, something we can't take for granted, something we must take care of. I believe we are stewards of this earth, stewards of the natural resources around us, stewards of the environment, and stewards of water. We must protect water and the world around us, not just for us, but for generations to follow.
I'm standing at a park near my home in Michigan, where I've been taking frequent walks throughout the pandemic. When I was growing up, the creek that flows through here flash flooded really frequently. But after a restoration project that reestablished a floodplain and a wet meadow, the water is now kept here when it rains and it doesn't flood quite as much. It also makes really good habitat. You can see blue heron in the background, and I love being able to come here and see the herons and the egrets and the turtles and all the wildlife. It's just really nice to have some nature nearby. It makes me feel a little bit more connected to my community and a little bit more connected to the world around me.
My relationship with water is, I have a love for water. It's mostly what's in my body. Drink it every day. Feels nice to swim in. It's relaxing. So water gives us a lot. I love water. My first memories with water, I'd have to say, is going fishing with my dad. So like getting like big fish and like holding them on my finger. That was always fun. That was
is so sweet. Let's give it up for this media from Great Lakes Now and Milwaukee Water Commons. We're a little bit over time, so I want to just throw out 2 questions for for everyone. I guess the first one is, when I think about media, I watch, it's all sex, drugs, money, power. You guys were like water. Let's do lakes. Not the different direction. I'm into it. Creative risk. So thinking about that though, how have you seen audiences responding to this work? What are kind of like some moments that kind of like pop out to you? And what have you seen the impact of, how have you seen the impact of the media that you make? But I also, want to add on to that and tack onto that question is also, how is the impact that you're making or the connection that you see established with audiences and, or even the storytelling that you're doing, right? Even the way you're approaching the issue available to you only through media. And please don't give me no cliche. Well, because what allows us to connect to people is very, but really, like, what is the specificity of media around water? So how have you seen it impact? And what does media around water afford us that other ways of communicating or educating do not? And I'm judging your answers. I have a pen right here. You'll each get scored. Let's go. Come on, Nick. You look confident.
All right. No, I'm ready to go on this one. Actually, no, I think it's interesting. You have 2 people from the Detroit Public TV station. However, I think we come from different backgrounds. I know Sandy has done a lot in terms of like sailing and being on the water a bunch. However, myself, didn't have the greatest amount of experience with that beforehand. The first time I ever tried to go fishing, I was with a school project on Belle Isle on the Detroit River, where they give you like a little fishing rod and throw some cheese on it and say, see what you can catch. So by being able to have the show that we have, say again?
I said, that's just me at a gay bar. I just like have, put some cheese.
Well, I mean, the technique may work in different places. I don't know, but I'm always open to new techniques. But the moral of the story is that, whenever I'm trying to do storytelling with any of our projects, I always try to keep that in the back of my mind, that we're talking to a group of people who may know a lot about water. And then we've got a group of people who might not know as much, And so one of the ways that we're really able to impact people through TV is that, last time I checked, people who watched public television, there's a lot of individuals who are a bit younger. And it's not always the older and the quote unquote higher educated viewer that people say. When we look, a lot of folks, high school education or lower, it's an opportunity for them to get a connection with areas that they might not know as much of. We travel all across the Great Lakes. We're going up to, the Mackinac Island. First time I ever went was because of the show, and I grew up in Detroit, and I know people that I spoke with never make it up there. This gives them an opportunity through storytelling, through being out there, through making that connection with people, to bring those areas to folks who might not see it as much. And then they have an opportunity to understand why it's important. When you go out and talk to other people and you say, hey, I'm from Detroit, I'm from Michigan, I'm from a Great Lakes state. Oh, well, what do you guys have doing there? 20% of the world's fresh water comes from the Great Lakes, man. You didn't know, and that's not something I knew before I was doing this. So it really gives you an opportunity, I think, to show people why these things are so important and touch on all of our lives. And once you have that connection, then you start to progress and understand why you have to take it seriously, why you've got to call your Congress people, why you've got to, start making an impact in the community and protecting these resources.
I'll give that a 7. But but thinking a little bit more, Nick, what's kind of one of the coolest, because you just said you get to travel up and down the Great Lakes. What's kind of one of the coolest moments you experience as the host and narrator of the show?
Oh man, we get to really do some very cool things, right? I got to ride a ferry, which I hadn't done since I was a little kid. Got to get on a plane, because one of the only ways you can get onto the island back and forth is by traveling into a plane. There was a plan that I was going to go into a lighthouse. However, the pandemic threw that off, but I'm going to hold you to that one, Miss Svoboda. So we're going to have to do the lighthouse experiment later. But, it does give an opportunity. And then again, since these are things that I just did not have any access to, I always try to think in the back of my mind, who's watching this? How can they kind of live vicariously through me? How can they maybe in the future have that experience on their own, you know? And it's kind of like storytelling through personal experience that I think, you know, if you can make a connection with someone else, if it becomes important to them, then, you know, then they understand the value in it, then they take it into their own lives, then they progress it themselves.
What's one way you've seen the show change your relationship to water?
I mean, you know, every time we do something on the show, I learn more about it. You know, I don't even try to act like I came into this as an expert when it came to water. I came into it as someone who wanted to learn more and who knew it was important. So how can I learn more? And then you hear the stories about runoff. You hear the stories about, you know, we had a dam break inside of Michigan. You know, Sandy's talking about earlier the connection with the Flint water crisis. And I just learned so much more about, you know, like how water going into the land seeps out into the lake, and, you know, why it's important that, you know, we watch our the toxins that we're putting into, you know, farmland. All of that stuff, had no clue. And I always try to think of that again and why it's important to, you know, there's going to be people who are watching the show like me who did not know these things. You know, how can you make it something they can grasp and understand? So I'm just grateful that like I get the opportunity to like learn and then teach at the same time, hopefully giving proper information.
So Sandy, I'm gonna call you Sandy. If Nick doesn't, I'm gonna do it. Talking a little bit about the, talking about Great Lakes Now, how have you seen Great Lakes Now and its impact kind of reverberate in the Great Lakes communities?
Well, I think, you know, to sort of echo what Nick was saying, people have a relationship with the lakes. You know, water is really powerful. You saw that in the Milwaukee videos, and we've heard that from the other speakers in this program. And so part of what we try to do with the Great Lakes Now program in particular, you know, the website is sort of a constant feed of news, like feeding the beast, as we like to say, the daily diet of news, only all around the Great Lakes and water. But the show gives us a little time to take you somewhere a little bit different. So just like Nick talked about, you know, visiting Mackinac Island for a school basketball tournament, there were 4 schools from islands all over the Great Lakes that played a game there, and we went to produce that segment called Island Basketball, if you want to look it up. But, you know, even just for us going to Mackinac Island in December was really different than what most people think of as Mackinac Island. Bringing audiences the story of kids who go to school, who live on these islands and go to these small island schools, that's really different than what they think about, our audience thinks about when they go to these islands as tourists or visitors, or you know, you think about running away to an island. Well, here's a slice of what it's really like. So we only have 8 minutes, you know, for a segment for each show. So we really have to focus on partially giving the audience, you know, the storyline, of course, but also finding a way so that they feel like they saw the lakes a little bit differently, because a lot of people do think they know the lakes. We like to take them to a place they've been in a little bit of a different way, give them a little different glimpse, whether that's under the water on a shipwreck, whether that's testing the water in a laboratory, whether that's viewing the water from one of our drone shots, or of course, hearing from people about their work relative to the water, whether they're an expert or a student or somebody who makes a living from around the water, just to kind of give people that idea, another way that they can experience the lakes and learn a little bit more about it, and of course, appreciate them.
Okay, give me a second. I'd say that's a 6. This is on, you know, we'll curve. This will be graded on a curve. Yeah. Don't worry. I would also say, Sandy, in terms of, you know, I know that public media is always under attack, right? And so in terms of thinking about you know, the Great Lakes Now show, right? In terms of like advocating for it, if you were to say like, here's why this show is important, right? Here's why this show needs to happen. What would you say? And what are some of the dreams that you would have for the growth of this show?
Oh, wait, how much time do I have?
45.
That's not fair. This is a huge question. Okay, so you know, we only launched, like we just did our 20th episode. And so to us, 20 is a lot, but it's also, we're a really, really young program. There are not a lot of programs like ours. Of course, you know, anybody watching knows that their PBS station has its own local programs. For example, in Detroit, we have the One Detroit program that does news and public affairs for Detroit and Michigan. Cleveland has its own programming. Chicago has a daily broadcast. Milwaukee has its own Wisconsin, kind of travel. All of the stations do some work relative to the water because they know that it's important to their audiences and their audiences like it and learn from it. To do a regional show is a really kind of different thing. And so we've been slowly building and have a growing number of stations that are carrying our program, which is great. And then, of course, we all know we're living in 2020. So pandemic aside, when we had to really move a lot of things online into virtual events like this one, we're also really trying to integrate our platforms so that somebody who finds, somebody who plugs Great Lakes into YouTube finds our content and can navigate it the same as anybody would who sees a tweet that we put out or a Facebook watch party, let alone seeing the show over the air in the traditional fashion or having somebody share one of our articles. So, I mean, this is kind of getting into the weeds on media, but that whole idea of how do we help the audience find our content, but also preserving, our journalistic ethics and, kind of the higher standards that everybody expects from PBS and we can deliver.
Thank you, Sandy and Nick. I want to offer a question to Ann. So Ann, I'm thinking about, this media that you're sending, right, is the media that you showed us was actually user created, right? It was kind of a participatory project. And so can you talk a little bit about the response of, and I think that's interesting because we talk about so much about like representation in media and about communities allowed to represent, but seldomly that means allowing communities to self-represent. And at a kind of very atomic level, the project that you showed is doing that. And so can you talk to us a little bit about, what the response to that project was, what was kind of the, and how you saw it kind of, and how the people that I think oftentimes when we think about media, we think it has to change the world, but sometimes it changes the people that participate in the making of it, and that's enough. And so can you talk to me a little bit about, this project and what you saw the results of it being?
Yeah, I mean, I think we thought that we were excited about this project because we thought it would engage, people on a couple different levels. And one of those is engaging the people who are actually creating the video. And we, started this off by brainstorming a list of like a lot of community partners and then just Milwaukee leaders. We had the Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes do a video for us. We just put out a lot of asks and we ended up getting, I think we've posted over 30 of them now, and we have more in the queue. But I think the people who actually did the videos spent some real time like thinking about what they wanted to say. And I think it was a great way to engage those people. Not to mention the people that saw the videos on social media and our website and YouTube. And I think when people saw them, they could see themselves and they could see, like, oh yeah, I have like a water story too. And it doesn't have to be polished and I can share it. And we do that through a lot of our events in the summer. We let, try to get people to share their water stories. And we weren't able to do that this year in person. So we thought this would be an exciting way to try it.
And so I'm thinking, what is, so this kind of was a response to the pandemic, that kind of like even the conceptualization of this project. And so what are ways that you're thinking about how people can go forward in terms of thinking about that Milwaukee Water Commons is thinking about making media?
We're starting to get much more into video. We never did video before. We're a really small nonprofit. We've got a staff of 6. We just didn't do video. But so this year on this project has kind of inspired us to also create another video project that we're going to be rolling out over the next few weeks for our annual appeal, and then it'll go on our website. And so yeah, I think just it's definitely opened our eyes to what, how powerful and inspiring video can be, and the role it can play in getting people excited about water stewardship and, just water in general.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? Because, there's this project that we're kind of all here gathered around called The River Speaks. And when we think about water stewardship, we kind of think about the idea of, and then you all are doing that in your own work, right? By having people talk about their connections to the water, and how it might speak to them. and through them. And I'm thinking about that because whenever we think about kind of work and representation, it's and even water stewardship, we think about it as far as like, are you cleaning up the river? Are you cleaning up the water?
Right.
But part of it means even amplifying the stories that this water has to tell. Part of it also means, allowing that water to be represented and represented over and over as a force in our lives. And so I think this work is so important because of that. I'm going to give myself a 10. That was actually really brilliant the way I came up with that right now. You did great, Anne. You all did great. So let's give Nick and Sandy and Anne a round of applause.
Was there a question?
No, just that it was a statement, and it's that I'm amazing.
No, I mean from Dr. Scott.
Oh yes, and so for Scott, for questions, thank you so much. We'll be taking them at the end of the program. But Nick, if you want to narrate this event, let me know, okay? Because I'll just sign off then.
I'm taking notes this whole time. I'm just taking notes.
I'm just kidding. Kind of. So let's give Nick and Anne and Sandy a round of applause. And we're going to keep things moving. We heard part of the Backward River with some of River Speaks with some of the actors. There were 2 actors that were not in part of that segment because we are going to show you them right now. Let's give it up for Miss Pinqy Ring and Ross Compton. If y'all can wave. We're going to hear one more excerpt from the Backward River Project as a live. Whenever you're ready. So now it's getting awkward. We're gonna hear from, there we go.
Ooh, I'm like, somebody unmute me, please. This is so normal for me. Like, just someone please unmute me, please help. So once again, my name is Pinqy Ring, and I will be reading for the Upper North Branch.
And Ross will be reading for the Sanitary and Ship Canal.
Correct. My name is not Stuart Stout, by the way. This happened because of a different event, and it won't let me change it. So this whole time I've been incognito as Stuart Stout, and I apologize. I did not mean to deceive anyone.
I want to start writing fake names on mine. Let's hear this. I'm so excited. River Speaks.
I remember our trails of green foliage before they were smothered by opaque asphalt. When the skyscrapers were lands we once farmed and flowed through. In those times, I worked in tandem with the people who shared my banks for their homes and communities. I farmed a lot back then. My branch members north and south did so too, even Mainstem, as much as they try to distance themselves from our history. Our relationship with the indigenous people was mutualistic and symbiotic. We benefited greatly through our organic communion. Yet, our history is told as if it begins when the North Shore Channel and the Sanitary and Ship Canal tore into our community. Many are mistaken and misinformed to think we have always looked this way, that the canal and channel have always been here. These misconceptions muddle our history, much like how they muddled our waterways through pollution and destruction.
Don't be fooled by the Upper North's pleasant memories. Those times are long past. We're part of a city that works and that requires industry. We can't let nostalgic protections and regulations get in the way of industrial capital. Oh, excuse me, I forgot to properly introduce myself. I am the Sanitary and Ship Canal. I have blazed my own trail to transform Chicago from swamp prairie into a boom town. I make Chicago matter. Not the main stem, not the North Branch, and especially not the South Branch, the most ungrateful branch of this city. They spout off my existence as one of irreparable harm, as if I have tainted this city with greed and gluttony, that I am allowed to be a massive public health risk and affect the neighborhoods around me. I say they are often hyperbolic. Now, I do recognize my work, and my position in this river is intimidating and difficult to embrace. I see you, and I hear you. But I must say, if the South Branch chose to embrace their numerous industrial corridors, they would realize how important they were instead of going on about human rights violations. If only the branches understood their worth. That's the problem with a lot of the branches, except the main stem. Though he may be a milksop, he gets the job done, presenting the city as pretty and posh. Unlike the stem, I have to get my hands dirty to ensure this city runs. You see, I do my own sewage.
Our history is told as if it begins when the North Shore Channel and the Sanitary and Ship Canal tore into our community. Many are mistaken and misinformed to think we have always looked this way and that the canal and channel have always been here. These misconceptions muddle our history, much like how they muddled our waterways through pollution and destruction. There are many ways for you to relate to us. We're your waters, your neighbors, your relatives. Ask yourselves what you would like to line the riverbanks, how you feel about pumping waste to a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, how many more floods you can weather. You and we are intertwined as branches of life.
Let's give it up for Ross and Pinqy Ring. Pinqy Ring is staying on brand with those beautiful pink walls. I love it. That was so great. What I'd like to do right now is kind of welcome back, and if everyone from the Freshwater Lab, Rachel, Becky, Citlali, and Kathleen, Tristen, and Anish, and Erica, if you all can please wave. And if we can have our other guests, the cast from Backward River, as well as Nick, Sandy, Anne, and Brenda, and Jeremiah wave. Great. And so I just want to kind of open it up for, for questions. I have one that I'd want to ask, but we've sat through some media, we've heard some awesome kind of facts, a lot of new things that I learned. I'm brilliant, so I know other people must have learned stuff too. So if we can if there are any questions on the Facebook, I can look through those comments. I do want to start off with a question from that was asked earlier from Sammer, who is on the cast, and the question was a question around for any of the panelists. We definitely need, and the question says, we definitely need a Green New Deal, but I was wondering how internationalism can be brought into topics like this to highlight how much wealth and labor in the US is stolen from the rest of the world. So yeah, Rachel is quick. I saw that she unmuted herself. I and it was unmuted.
Funny you should ask. The phrase that I shared with Summer in the chat is resource sovereignty. And it's just as valid for a location like Palestine or Iraq as it is for us around the Great Lakes, because we have to remember that one of the oldest laws in Western law is public trust law. And according to that public trust, the water is to be managed and governed by everyone who lives in the watershed. And even before public trust law, right, we learned from indigenous relationships to water that saw that as an inseparable kind of kinship. And so we've forgotten this. We've forgotten that water is public, that water is ours, and that water binds us together. And so this is a movement that is international in scope and so important for people, right? I mean, there's a lot of steps to it. Becky and Erica and Brenda were speaking about this as well, because we've got all these layers, right? We've got corporations, we've got the military, we have many things. We've got bankrupting cities, as happened in Detroit, but we've got all these layers separating us from our water. But for us to claim this, right, for us to claim the jurisdiction, the wealth, I feel I would not be chasing after all of you about bottled water if it went back into public coffers, if it was made in biodegradable containers, if it brought wealth back in instead of taking it out. So, right, the charge is for us to say, right, this water is governed, is managed by us, by future generations, by other species in the ecosystem. And I think especially for the Great Lakes region, this is our healing and redemption, right? It's been rough. Segregation, deindustrialization, offshoring wealth. But for us to collectively claim this water and its health, like that's where the healing is. That's the great transformation. And so the international part of that is that we really need to change a system that's a good 100 years old, in which living by water or living above minerals and petroleum store alienated you from it. It like automatically belonged to BP or Nestle. And so the point is to assert a new kind of sovereignty over the resources themselves and setting up new forms of governance, right, that can endure even when we go through totally destructive periods of federal or even state government.
That's great. I know, Dr. Scott, you had a question. Would you love to ask it?
Oh, Dr. Scott, can you, let me see, can you unmute yourself?
I can unmute.
Okay. Hang on.
Oh, it's not coming through. You can type it in the chat. And in the meantime, we have a question from Tim Lyons that's watching on Facebook. And the question is there any interest in advocacy for degrowth?
Any degrowthers here?
I mean, Rachel, maybe anyone could share. Can you share, exactly what that entails, degrowth?
Yeah, my understanding of it, it's really associated with the Club of Rome out of Vatican City that published a really important article some years ago that said all of our models, all of our economic models are based on this constant growth. And it gets measured in some ways that are somewhat mysterious to me, like how is subsidizing the barge industry or mega developments here in Chicago, like Lincoln Yards in the 78, like how is handing our public money or our resources to out-of-town corporations, like how is that growth? But that somehow gets measured as growth. So degrowth movement is to put different kind of measures. So you wouldn't measure like how much money, passed through different channels and on Wi-Fi in a year, right? You would measure like how clean is your water? What are the ratios of asthma and lung disease, right? What's the life expectancy? What's the happiness index? So all these things that would take away just simply the movement of numbers among a small group of people that measure somehow our economy. So degrowth is kind of moving away from that and introducing new measures.
I mean, right, because it's even when we think about how we measure, right, development within nations, it's within a gross national product, right? These kind of like measurements that actually are not, that measure that have a very kind of narrow purview of what development entails. And I think for so many reasons, right, like kind of critics of like Western modernity have said that like, it's not that we live in the undeveloped world, it's that you live in the overdeveloped world. And that the world that you live in that's considered developed was predicated upon some of the things that Samira was bringing up, right? The extraction of resources from the global south that left those kind of areas more vulnerable. Dr. Scott, let's give it up for Dr. Scott for getting.
Yeah, she came in, that's it. No, well, I have to just say I'm a huge fan, Dr. Haverlock, and then Sit Lolly. It was no way I was not going to be here for Sit. But let me just
Dr. Scott, what about me?
Oh, well, Ricardo, of course, what can I say? Magnifique. Okay, that's it. But just, and I tell you, if I had my life to live over, I probably would have gone the way of water. I've been transported. But let me tell you what, the things that you're saying have so resonated. I do a nonprofit. It's Introducing Youth to American Infrastructure, Inc. And we look at we take a particular focus on the 4 lifeline sectors. Water is one of them. And let me tell you what young people say. So don't try to make this be more complicated. I love everything you're doing. This is what they've told me, and these are high schoolers. They have been fascinated by the water sector. DC, the last one in Chicago, fascinated, okay? Because their quotes, these are 10th, 11th, and 12th graders. What we thought about water was that we thought about you turn the faucet on, this is a quote, and you turn it off, and this is notwithstanding Anacostia Green projects in DC and all that kind of stuff. And then when it came to, and you flush a toilet. Mm-hmm. This is a quote, these are quotes from young people, okay? So this notion of the connectedness of just getting them, and then as soon as they had no idea that you can actually turn all this trash into clean energy. They have no idea of what they just don't understand. And when you think about it from a public standpoint, short of water looking dirty, stinking, or you have a crisis like Flint, there is the demystification of how do you, as John or Jane Pugh Public, understand the quality of your water and what it's doing. It's very difficult, okay? And so all I'm saying is that what may be seeming to you as this is mundane, we're connecting people, we're getting them out on our water, we're doing these building blocks, basic building blocks have been so lost in terms of water and its significance. Pinqy Ring, I could jump through this thing and kiss you and Ross, okay? Because it's all of that we need to rebuild. And I just say, I mean, I am just floored. And I did grow up in the Great Lakes. I was Lake Erie girl, okay, with floating fish, okay? But you guys are absolutely fabulous. And none of what you're doing is trite, because it's all those necessary building blocks to have people once again understand how critical water is to life. Okay, so anyway, that's my.
I think that's beautiful, right? And you're talking to high schoolers, and you brought up this idea of like the public, right? Yeah, let's give it up, Dr. Scott. Let's give it up for me again. Thank you. So I think one of the things, but I think when we talk about this idea of right, the public, right, it's like, and I was joking with Nick and Sandy and Ann about making media about sex, power, right? Like, but the reality is when we think about water, it's not necessarily we don't necessarily think about it as the most attractive topic, right? Of like, oh, I can't wait to watch that shit about water, and so what are the avenues or ways that you all can imagine this discourse going viral outside of oftentimes the privileged circles of activism or academics, or when people are actually having to confront with this in very real ways in their own communities that might be that might be getting polluted? Like, what are the ways that we could actually amplify this type of work, or even create avenues for more robust work? Yeah, Anish, I see that little hand up.
Yes, this is something Tonika brought up in her meeting with Tristen and me, but these characters, just like through arts and media, right? And getting it into middle school and high schools for people to use these characters and build upon them, There's so much that can be done through arts and media. And Tonika had a lot of great ideas about allowing students to extend the dialogue of the characters, allowing students to create an interaction between these characters, asking students, what do you think these characters look like? And through that, allow them to build this relationship to the water and to just from the get-go, from a young age, have a more holistic, mutualistic appreciation and gratitude for it. That's one way.
Anyone else have any ideas?
Just writing these characters, like, this is like the drama that we can make out of like a river. It's ways to entertain people and engage them with something that seems so mundane, but just transforming it into something that is like popcorn, like movies. You just take it in, and but it's like substance that you can actually like, wow, that lake, that river is right next to me. I can actually do something about it. I can actually engage with it, and you draw your own connections through like something like creating characters out of branches. It's all there, and I love it so much. So the drama's there. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about, and we even think about documentary work, but I think one of the things that I really appreciate it, which so often is kind of the work that comes around when we're confronting social issues, but I would love so much, the idea that there was kind of like this fictional, imaginative, fantastical slice that was with this work. I think I mentioned that I'm writing for television. Right now I'm staffed on Lena Waithe's show, The Chi, on Showtime, and then I'm developing a feature program, but the other feature that I'm, to develop actually is centered around, because of the work that I've been doing with the Freshwater Lab, is a superhero story with youth of color superheroes, and an environmental kind of, it has an environmental backdrop that centers on the Great Lakes and, and Lake Michigan, where the uber rich are creating their own island to insulate themselves from the climate crisis that they've created. And so I'm thinking about,
which, by the way, happened this spring with people like Ken Griffin and such, going into bunkers.
Oh, I mean, in Echo Atlantic, off of the coast of Nigeria in 2014, The Guardian broke the story in which some of the richest people in the world have bought in real estate on an island that's modeled after the, has the French Champs Élysées, reconstruction on it. And, I think it can house 250, it can self-sustain for 250 years. But the same people that created the climate crisis that, will affect places like Africa have already bought land on there, as well as, part of my own research was also informed by billionaire bunkers in New Zealand, which, wealthy white corporate men who believe that their wealth is a sign that they are not meant to perish with the rest of us during climate genocide. And so bought themselves bunkers in there. I have, I could send it because I think it's interesting. Are there any other kind of questions that anyone wants to bring up either on the Facebook that I'm looking at or in the chat?
I just want to add that sometimes you don't even need a bunker. You don't need to be super rich. And we saw that again play out in Chicago. And I'm reminded of your intention, Becky, for this project, when you referenced the fact that the river itself was weaponized against the citizens and the residents of Chicago during this time of civil unrest and social movements here in the city, when the bridges were raised around the river. And those within a certain area were protected and had police around them and so on and so forth. And those within a certain area were endured a lot of injustice. And so it's really poignant, particularly because we're talking about developing a relationship with the river, but what happens when you use the river to inflict harm and violence on people?
Well, right, because it also shows the play, as a queer person and also a scholar of like queer violence, there's always a question of immunity, right? Precisely because we're a population that survived, right, the AIDS crisis and things like that. And I'm thinking a lot about that because I'm thinking, even considering, precisely what we were talking about with the raising of the bridges. I, was living in Pilsen for several years, which, I'm asthmatic. I spent a lot of time growing up in Little Village as well, and then moved downtown during the uprisings for several reasons. And one of the things that was so nuts is when they raised the bridges and forced kind of Black rage and rage against police brutality to turn onto itself and only allowed it to be expressed in these kind of more vulnerable communities, you would not be able to know that chaos was happening in downtown, and that they literally created an island and insulated downtown of luxury. You could walk down Rush Street and you would not think there was a pandemic. You would not think that there was kind of like protests. It was people like out and dining. And, it was one of the most bizarre things. I felt like I was in the Hunger Games, and not because I was actually hungry. Any other thing that anyone wants to kind of close out on?
Maybe while we have our Milwaukee and Detroit friends here, like a little Great Lakes shout out. I really didn't want this day to pass without really acknowledging that I feel that these two cities just saved America, and that, Milwaukee and Detroit need just really, let's think about that people came out, under really, really hard conditions, after continual, like really awful wrestling with the pandemic under all the circumstances to keep them from the polls. And like these two cities, like really delivered for all of America and maybe the world, back to Sommer's point. So I just want to like give a big shout out to that. And in terms of what that means next, I think it means like, you know, asking back, you know, for that acknowledgement and gratitude and getting water back and having that control and having, you know, all the wealth and beauty that is water, you know, come to the people who just saved this country. So, you know, we've had a lot of critique, but I just so much love for the Great Lakes cities. And clearly, you know, those of us that are safe in those situations, we got to go out to those other counties on the lakes that are not cities or reservations. And we got to build some bridges and get some people also thinking about their relationship. But like, yeah, just like heart to the hometown and to Cream City and just like Detroit and Milwaukee and Philly, Sarah, you know, you can't say enough about Philly too, just really, really delivered.
Let's give it up for Milwaukee and Detroit. And thank you for that, Rachel. We're going to close out with the performance from Pinqy Ring, but I do want to encourage everyone to go check out the Freshwater Lab at the Freshwater Lab's website and the Backward River website. Also, I think what can happen, and so oftentimes in these type of discussions, is we feel energized, we feel informed, and want to know what to do next. At the Backward River Oregon, at the Freshwater Lab's website, they have a toolkit for reclaiming water that I invite everybody to check out. It is amazing and it is awesome. Also want everyone to check out the Milwaukee Water Commons and the Great Lakes Now show. You got them. They integrated their media. You heard Sandy. You can check it out on YouTube. You can hear Nick talk and go to Mackinac Island. It will be great. Let's go ahead and close out with live performance from Miss Pinqy Ring.
Thank you. I was having issues being unmuted again. You guys just don't want me to talk, do you? But I'm going to talk my talk. I'm going to talk my talk. So once again, really excited and humbled to be here and part of this project. I always tell people, like, I never was an actress. The only time I act is when I tell my boyfriends that I love them all equally. They'll learn someday. So it's really cool to be a part of this and to be able to give voice to something that, you know, is voiceless, and really proud of the work that everyone here is doing to create awareness around that. Interestingly enough, the song I'm going to perform, I performed for the Hoodoise mixtape and performed for Ricardo. And I remember everyone that was there then, I was like, this needs to be a music video. This needs to be more. So we're working on that. Shout out to Grant Money. And if you have more dollars, you can feel free to send them my way. That would be great. So this song is called Revolucion. And I wrote it when a certain president, who shall remain nameless, went into office, and just was part of me sort of venting my own frustrations. And now that things are seemingly changing, but we all know what the real truth is behind all of that, it really is just a call for us to create our own revolution, right? Because they won't save us, but we can certainly save ourselves. So this is Revolucion.
Those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and the power they took from the people.
And as you're listening, I hope that you understand and realize that you all are a part of an incredible change that is changing every day, but you all are at the helm, and we're really going to change this world by any means necessary. And I'm really proud of everyone here for all of the work that you all do. And to anyone watching, you can create your own revolution. You can create your own change. And that's exactly what we're doing.
The unloved and the unnatural.
Whip you, slave you, treat you like you're nothing, trick you, play you like we ain't worth loving, afflict you, deprave you, head hunting, they will not save you, but changes coming. How many times are we proving our worth? It seems to me we've been doomed since our birth, soiling and toiling and working their dirt. We are out of our patience, our bodies are hurt. Put food on their table, they give us the scraps. This can't be life, we are bigger than that. You gotta know this is bigger than rap. Whew. This is bigger than rap. Revolution theme. This is our music, our time, our beautiful struggle, our movement, our voice, our poder, our church. No Judas, our worth, our earth, our land. We could prove it. Do you want a revolution? Like Kirk Franklin, it's time to remove anti-black and brown sanctions. If they don't listen, we'll take it to their mansions. No more dreams deferred. This is that Langston. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for the fallen soldiers. Revolution starts today. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for the fallen soldiers. Revolution starts today. Sandra, Philando, holy be their name. Oscar Lopez and Fidencio. Revolution starts today. Go tell it on the mountain if you think that he's a chump. The hood's on standby too, and you can get it, Mr. Trump. Cause bigotry is whack, misogynistic, racist, sexist, classist. We gon' start a revolution, teach it in the classes. It takes a whole village, educate the masses. We need to meditate like gangsters. We need to heal all our anger. We need to take back our land, grow our own food and love like our grandmas. We need to meditate like gangsters. We need to heal all our anger. We need to take back our land, grow our own food and love like our grandmas. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for the fallen soldiers. Revolution starts today. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for our fallen soldiers. Revolution starts today. My mommy's a crossing guard, my papi is laid off. My grandma can't read or write, but they still be going hard. I do this for the gods, I do this for no applause. For immigrants, education, so when the time comes, what you gon' do? Ain't shit gon' change till we all move. Revolution, troops in our truth, change the future for our youth. We shine, we sell it, we ride, we die, we whip whatever. Don't see bullshit like Helen Keller, we'll not stay prop like Rockefeller. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for the fallen soldiers. Revolution starts today. Everyone here, if you're ready to see some change in the world, let me see you put a fist up in the air like this. We are going to create the change that we want to see in this world. I promise you that. Revolution starts today. Get the paletero, get the homeboys too. Get the bucket boys, forget the boys in blue. Call the spirit of our ancestors, say their name. This is for the fallen soldiers. Revolution.
Hey, let's give it up for Miss Pinqy Ring. That might have been one of the best Zoom performances I've seen. She is so damn confident. And I was like, but if she's walking out with that beautiful purple hair and not giving a damn what anybody thinks, then you know she's gonna bring it in this tiny little frame. Let's give it up for Pinqy one more time. You can check out the website. She is a great performer, but also does a ton of other outreach work that I know I'm familiar with and everyone else should be familiar with as well. Thanks so much, Pinqy. And so we're here at the end. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Nick, Sandy, and Ann, who were able to call in from their respective Michigan and Wisconsin homelands. And let's also give it up to the cast of Backward River, Ross, Derek, Sammer, Sarah, Pinqy, and Tonika, as well to our friends from LVEJO. We had Brenda and Jeremiah. And also the great family that is being built at the Freshwater Lab that is helping save our city. Becky, Tristen, Erica, Rachel, Sitlali, and Anish. Where you at, Anish? I'm like trying to find out, get all the
Went
names.
to class.
I mean, just do what I do and cut. But thanks for everybody. Follow up. Thank you so much for coming to the Freshwater Media Festival, and check out the Freshwater Lab. Thanks so much and have a good night. Hey.